Well, thank you for joining me on my video tonight. It is Saturday evening, April 23rd, nearly 10 o'clock at night, and it is 71 degrees here on my back porch. I want to share something with you that I read from a book that I've been talking about. It's called Factfulness, written by Hans Rosling. It's about 10 reasons why we're wrong about the world and why things are better than you think. And it's just very enlightening, and I just kind of want to shed some light on a few of the things that have been brought to my attention, and I hope that it will help you put things into perspective and help you move forward. The real aim of this tonight is to encourage you to be more prudent and more selective about what you allow yourself to listen to. We have so much input coming our way, and it's affecting us mentally, emotionally, even physically. And we have the power to turn things on and off. We have the ability to put up blockades or even filters to take some kind of control over this. And where I want to start with this is just by simply telling you to stop watching the news. Stop paying attention to all the Hollywood gossip. Stop talking about it. Stop caring about it, because chances are you really don't even care that much. But where the real problem lies in is when you start believing too much of what you hear, that the world is worse than it's ever been, it's more dangerous than we've ever experienced before, and it's unparalleled to any other time in history in such a negative way. And none of these things are true. And yet it's affecting you. And what it's doing is it's causing you to be more fearful. And as I mentioned in 2 videos ago, fear drives away the ability to think critically. Okay? In this book, the part that I'm in right now, he's talking about the fear instinct. And the portion that I read today started off with saying this. Now listen carefully. He said, none of us has enough mental capacity to consume all the information out there. And you think about it, there's a lot of it, isn't there? There's more information being sown than at any other time in history. That's undeniable because of technology, because of the very thing that you're probably watching this on right now. You have access to more information than you've ever had before, than anybody's ever had before. Okay? This is something you just seriously and strongly consider. Okay? So he says, none of us has enough mental capacity to consume all the information out there. The question is, what part are we processing, and how did it get selected? And what part are we ignoring? The kind of information we seem most likely to process is stories, information that sounds dramatic. Now, why would that be? Where would that be coming from? That kind of answers the question of how did it get selected. Well, we're getting it from the media, aren't we? Now, I say stop watching the news. I stopped watching the news on TV probably 4 years ago. And you still can't get away from it, because you get onto Facebook and people are either posting it or they're trying to direct you to their news page. And if you don't get it there, you get it on Instagram, or you get it from people sending you different things from different media platforms, right? So it's really hard to get away from the news. Okay, but he goes on to say here, if we are not extremely careful, we come to believe that the unusual is usual, that this is what the world looks like. Now, the reason why it's important to say this is because he makes it emphatically clear that the world is a much different place than it used to be, but it is vastly better than it's ever been before. You know, there are so many things that have changed for the better. One of the things he really outlines here is that there needs to be a cessation of the mindset that there is a difference between them and us. The whole them and us argument. Where he begins is that there's no such thing as undeveloped nations anymore. Not just underdeveloped. There's no such thing as undeveloped nations anymore. All nations are developed. And when you begin there, you begin to see things a little more clearly. Maybe a couple hundred years ago, maybe even 100 years ago, some nations were undeveloped. But not anymore. All nations are developed. That does not mean that we're all on equal economic levels. And he makes it, he outlines that there are 4 different income levels to be paid attention to. But nobody is really stuck in any of them, okay? Unless they choose to be. But it doesn't mean that it's easy, and it doesn't mean that everybody will change, but they can. And the important thing to remember about this is that the world has changed globally. The way things are occurring, everything has changed globally. Now, one of the things we hear about all the time is natural disasters, okay, and how horrible they are. And natural disasters have always happened, and maybe they might be happening more frequently, according to scientific data. Some things are happening much more frequently, but they don't go away. But the world responds to these things much differently than they used to. In fact, he was saying that 100 years ago, there were 5 billion less people on the planet. And yet more people died 100 years ago in natural disasters than currently. Even though there's 5 billion more people. And there's actually only 1/6 of the number of people that die now in earthquakes, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, so on and so forth, you name it. It's only 1/6 of the number that it was 100 years ago, despite the fact that there's just almost what it seems like infinitely more people. But yet, if you listen to the news, they'll talk about how things are worse than they've ever been. Well, why would we make an argument that things are better? Because all nations are richer than they've ever been before. That's not to say that some of them aren't without their problems. Some of them are. There's a spectrum. It's the lines are blurred in a lot of cases, but most nations live in middle income categories. A lot of people don't want to hear that, but it's the truth. And when you consider that, what we begin to understand is that with greater income comes greater resources, more knowledge, greater technology, better preparedness, faster response times, global interaction with sending responders and resources to help neighboring countries, because now everyone is our neighbor. With the way news travels and the way that we can travel geographically, everyone is our neighbor. And people are getting help faster. Less people are dying. And what he points out here is that we need to get to the point that when we hear a news reporter or journalist say something like, hold on a second, let me see where he has put in his words. When a journalist turns the camera and says, "The world just became a bit more dangerous," will you be able to disagree? It's important to be able to do that. When the journalist says with a sad face, "In times like these," will you smile and think that she was referring to the first time in history when disaster victims get immediate global attention and foreigners send their best helicopters? So you see, things are better. Things are better. Now, this is not addressing everything that could be brought up here, but it's just simply to shine a light on the fact that you need to be careful about who you're listening to. Don't believe everything, and learn how to shut things off. At least establish some kind of a filter. Establish boundaries for yourself. He said here, there's a paradox that the image of a dangerous world has never been broadcast more effectively than it is now, while the world has never been less violent and more safe. It's true. It's true. But the media does their best to distort our worldview. While we might actually be safer, they can make you feel more afraid by distorting your worldview. So be very mindful of that. Be very selective. Put up filters. Stop watching the news. Stop taking part in water cooler gossip. Stop looking at what's going on in the media so much. I mean, one of the things that's really taking up a lot of cyberspace right now is the whole Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, right? And people seem to be very interested in it, but I guess I would have to ask people, do you actually really care? So why are you watching? Why do we watch these things? Is it only to make ourselves feel worse or to feel bad for them? Even if it doesn't directly involve us, it's still negative. Why allow all the negativity? Take control. Take some responsibility. Find equally good news when you hear really bad news. Now, he makes it clear you don't want to trivialize something bad that's actually happening to you or someone that you love. Sometimes you do have to just work through it. But we have to be circumspect in all things. And not let it become something that makes us think that the whole world is dark and shadowy. Back in 1929 in Somerville, New York, there was a man named David Wilson who was coming home late from work one night. And he walked into the back door of his house, to see 13 dogs sitting in his living room on his chairs, all wagging their tails and looking at him, greeting him as he walked through the door. Now, David Wilson did not own a dog. He didn't even like dogs. Okay? But he had this on his hands. And he went upstairs and asked his wife about this, and she said she had no knowledge of it. She'd been busy upstairs. But the dogs had gotten in because it was a cold time of the year. David Wilson had left the cellar windows open, and the dogs were just simply looking for a warm place. You know, there's this fancy invention, one of the greatest inventions that you don't ever hear about, but it was one of the greatest inventions ever devised. The window screen. The window screen, it's not necessarily real strong, but it's good at keeping things out. It allows you to get fresh air in and bad air out. But it also keeps things at bay, like pests and vermin, and filters some of the air to some degree. And it was one of the inventions that improved the health of mankind back in the early 1800s. It didn't become popular until 75, 100 years later, but it was invented in the early 1800s, advertised and a little more heavily in the 1860s, I believe. But it became a barrier and a filter. And if David Wilson had had screens on his cellar windows, perhaps the dogs wouldn't have gotten in. Well, maybe they could have busted through, but it would have been at least an impediment they would have had to encounter. And so when you allow the media to just put everything into your head without any kind of filter, without any kind of screen, you're exposing yourself to bad mental health. You really are. And you need to stop. You need to turn things off. I know people personally that seems like they believe almost everything they hear. And they're negative. Their worldview is so negative, and it's sad because it doesn't have to be that way. It's not the way to live. Don't be like David Wilson. Screen everything. Put up a barrier. It's okay to let things in and out, but you have to have some control over it. The world is not as bad as you think. Keep that in mind. Thanks for watching, guys. Enjoy the rest of your night and make sure you get plenty of sleep. I'll catch you in the next one. Be wise.